Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's Inspiring Leadership podcast, where the two podcast hosts, Graham Brown and Jonathan Bowman-Perks, both sort of share stories. And this one, we're pulling together the whole of our sort of 10 episodes that we've done. And looking back over, what does inspiring leadership mean? What about the integration of the different elements? Which ones sort of stand out for us? What have we reflected on? And what happens if you're missing bits? So, Graham, what sort of thoughts come to mind for you about this whole topic as you look back over it?
Well, we've had quite a journey, haven't we? There were a number of episodes, so much covered. We didn't just talk about inspiring leadership, but as you said, what happens when leadership goes wrong? I thought that was pretty interesting. We learned a lot about leadership when it goes toxic. And I think you could probably know more about leadership when it's sort of dysfunctional. So those episodes were really good. I'm sure we're going to reference them today. I will add, in preparation for this, and I'm going to keep my powder dry a little bit, Jonathan. So just a military analogy again. I found there's three really big pieces of news this month, and they all relate to leadership. And one's related to climate change, one's related to remote work, and one's related to AI. And I'm sure your listeners probably this is coming up time and time again in their conversations. What do I do about AI? What's my position on it? So I'd be happy to share some of that and get your thoughts on it as well.
Yeah, well, also bullying in the workplace. We had Dominic Raab just being removed from his job, and people go, he wasn't that bad, really. So let's have a look at that aspect, because people sort of see it a bit of sort of muscular Christianity, or whatever they want to call it, in whatever terms, that just being a bit strong. He was just gritty. No, he wasn't. He was a bully. Why inspire leadership? The whole idea, going back a bit, that Lee and my wife Lee and I did all the research over a number of years about what makes high-performing teams, what makes inspiring leaders, and what are the components that we find time and again in them. Where do they score higher? And we did the research with Dr. Reuven Bar-On, who's a fascinating guy, the Bar-On EQI. Reuven and I were hoping to catch up with Lee in Israel, but we never quite. As we were in the country, he was out of the country. But fascinating man who helped us a lot with our work and these quotients, these moral quotients, and so on, all the cues. And then a psychometric that we've got that measures people's inspiring leadership and their 360 feedback. So those are quite informative for people to know whether others find them inspiring leaders, or whether they think they're greater than they are, or actually humbler than they are. And people go, no, actually, they're better. So I think just briefly on that, the statistics were quite interesting, that there was no statistical difference between inspiring men and inspiring women. You'd hope that would be the case, but actually our research showed that to be the case, which is very good. But there was quite.
What do you mean difference in like the perception of them as a leader, like inspiring others?
The perception of them as a leader and how they scored themselves. How they scored themselves on the scales of the data, on the components that we're talking about. But there was quite a difference between average and inspiring. There was a noticeable difference between those that people rated as sort of, they're okay. But the ones that were really inspiring do stand out. And I know you and I have talked about the dangers of the great man, the great woman leader. But I've just been listening to the Russian Civil War in 1918 to 1921. And there was, Trotsky, who appears in St. Petersburg just as they're about to crumble to the White Russians. And he rallies them all to go and fight for the cause, even though they had no food for months, and stop the White Russians in their tracks. One man.
One man. So it was dangerous. That's why he got an ice pick through his.
He got an ice pick through his ear roll, as the
song goes.
No more heroes anymore. Was it who sang that one? No more heroes.
Stranglers.
The Stranglers, yeah, the punk rock Stranglers. He got an ice sack in his ear roll. So whether good or bad, individuals can make a huge difference. So I think more than ever. We need really inspiring leaders these days. We're in a turbulent time. There's a lot going on. And, that's why inspiring leadership is important. It's not just an academic exercise. We need it for performance, to get things done, for countries to run. for families to feel safe. What's your thoughts?
Oh yeah, for sure. We underestimate, don't we, the impact of one person that can have on a lot of people, whether it's in an organization or, you see it in these times of great change. These leaders stand up and they garner, they rally, they're like lightning rods, aren't they? For the zeitgeist, the feeling. And even within political systems, the same, because what the leader does then becomes the playbook, the green light. When you have a leader who's effectively challenging the validity of a system and the laws, then it green lights all the minions, normal people like you and I, to do the same. And so, that's why you'll get people up in arms and storming the Capitol, like we saw a few years back in the US, an insurrection, because you have the CEO, a leader, who says, actually, it's okay to challenge these laws. The whole system is, invalid. So that's the effect of a leader. And you then have that perpetuated through, all the kind of coterie of advisors and the media around people. It's the same within a company, isn't it? That one person can have an effect. It's just words, but the words that they say set the tone. And that tone can change everything. Yeah. Even as you see in the Russian, in the war, hundreds of millions of people.
Yeah, I mean, one of the other people that we spoke about, Nelson Mandela, and if only he was around now in South Africa, as it's going completely to pieces, that you have one great person who gives hope and inspiration to people, and then you have others who just take from it, rape and pillage the system, store money in their mattresses in their homes from corruption, things like that. And it's so tragic because it undoes all the good that's gone on. Yeah. And I think that the other thing that we were talking about is when things go wrong. The other thing I want to talk about is also leadership myths. I had a lovely session with Andrew Griffiths, Royal Naval Officer, who's also a leadership colleague. And he said that there are a number of leadership myths that we're all told that this is so. Actually, it's not. And we've shared a few of those. We haven't actually called them leadership myths, but I think those would be quite interesting to talk about. But before we do that, just thinking about this whole point of that we're trying to get people to be inspiring and have these elements, these components. But what if one of the bits was missing? Does it matter? Which one's the most important? And, are the others just nice to haves? I mean, I think particularly when MQ, moral quotient.
Yes, that's what I was thinking.
I think when integrity is missing, everything unravels. And I was with leaders recently, and they were talking about experiences they had, and it reminded me of one of the banking CEOs I was working with, talked about the PPI selling, that people were given this insurance they didn't need to protect their whatever it was, a mortgage or something like that, and it got a lot of money for the bank. And they began to realize quite early on that this was immoral, to be selling this insurance, PPI, to people, but yet at the same time, it was making them a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so they realized it was wrong, but they carried on doing it because it made them a lot of money. They didn't want to be the first one that stopped that huge cash flow that was coming into the bank, all the banks, many of the banks. And somebody eventually, I knew the person who eventually called it and go, we can't do this. This is immoral. But only just before it came out, a bit like Nicola Sturgeon going, I'm just, I'm just going to spend more time with my family and my mother's motorhome.
Get disappeared in the Russian sense.
That's right. That just before the scandal hit, they decided to do something about it. But I think.
But what was really interesting in that moral episode was that what we dug into a lot of cases of toxic leadership, or when it goes wrong in business and politics, and there was never really a binary event where a line was crossed, where people said, before it was legitimate and afterwards it was criminal or immoral. It usually is like a gray area, isn't it? And it's a creep, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's where it comes down to, not necessarily the rules, because often when these issues happen, like mis-selling of PPI, and there's numerous mis-selling of financial products over the last, I worked in the industry for 30 years. It never is, okay, this is wrong and this is against the law. It's, okay, this is questionable. So then that requires a leader to take a stand, and that's the moral quotient, the compass, if you like, to say that this is not right, even though we don't have a law about it, and they can take a stand. But it takes somebody to stand up and do that in the face of, share price. Or a revolt from the board.
But if we don't do it, somebody else will do it. Like, subprime mortgages. You're like,
or Tour de France. I know you're a cyclist, Jonathan.
Oh, yes.
Buying a bike. There you go. Like, well, I was doping. So everybody was doping. So, like Lance Armstrong, was he a villain because everybody else was doing it? If he didn't dope, then he wouldn't have qualified for the Tour de France. That moral stand is questionable, isn't it? Because it's basically saying, well, everybody else is doing it, it's okay. But you should know in yourself, isn't it? That's the moral quotient, isn't it? You know in yourself it's wrong.
I think so. I think this and when you let the compass needle drift, the true north, and it just a little bit, no one will notice. He says just this one, it's little by little you unravel. It's almost like getting hold of a thread in the jumper, and you just begin to unpull it, and soon the things up, and you just got the neck piece left. It's the same with the moral compass and doing the right thing. And take the PPI. People in America said this is immoral and it's wrong, and you cannot sell PPI. But they in Britain carried on for about another year. But yet they'd seen it in America, but they went, oh yeah, but let's carry on. It's too much of a gravy train for us to stop it. But
so what's that, like a policy protection insurance or something? What is PPI?
That's right. Yeah, I think that's what it says. I'm not sure.
It's kind of like selling phone insurance, isn't it?
Exactly. But they were selling it when people didn't need it, and they weren't checking whether they needed it or not. Had someone taken you through that? Had you been given the option of not paying for it? So I think it was always like stuck on as an add-on without actually people realizing they had a choice. So there's different ways of it being wrong, but I think so. So what's we always try to take this back to what's the practical tip for people listening? I just think we've got to check in with our own moral code and go. I find it useful now, and at times I've got it wrong. My moral compass, I've got it wrong, where in the rush to do things right and look good, you cut corners. You begin to justify it to say, oh, it's okay because of this. I've got to do well, so I'll just do this. And I think you almost need, what I found helpful these days is having almost like a mental team of your moral support team, like my late father, Nelson Mandela, Richard Dannett, people like that, John Griffin. Just imagine that my mother, that they were sitting around me, watching me as I made a choice on something or did something or said I was going to do something and hadn't done it or whatever it might be. And I go, would they have been proud? Would I be proud of what's going on? And I think it's needing that moment. We all need that moment to check in with ourselves against some kind of benchmark, some kind of litmus test. What works for you?
Yeah, I like that idea of like a mental, almost advisory board, isn't it? And if you look at how these leadership problems occur, and usually at the time, their reference points are their own people. That's the problem, isn't it? That they're looking at each other and those references points become detached from moral reality. And I've mentioned it a few times in this podcast, but go back to it. In Malcolm Gladwell's book, Talking with Strangers, he talks about the holy fool. Now, the holy fool is sort of an avatar, an archetype, your Jungian archetype, who basically appears in stories, and like the Hans Christian Andersen Emperor with No Clothes, it's the kid who sort of exists outside of the system and therefore doesn't play by the rules. And Gladwell's example is to do with, again, with it's the story of The Big Short and all those kind of financial frauds where people have called it out. And going back to Lance Armstrong, the chap in question, David Walsh, was the Irish journalist who, in the early days of Armstrong's rise to fame, was challenging the numbers. He said, look, this is impossible. You can't go from, where he was, last year to where he is now. Look at his performance. It's just inhuman. There's something going on here. It's not right. And he was standing up at the press conferences and challenging it. And as a result of that, he got, excoriated. He got excommunicated from the whole, cycling community effectively. So he's the holy fool in that instance. But, he was vindicated years to come when Oprah, gave a platform for Lance to come clean and confess. He was vindicated. He was right. But for all those years, he was saying, this is not right. This is not right. This is not, this is immoral. Something's wrong. And he took all that flack. So that's the challenge, isn't it, Jonathan? That is the people that do stand up and challenge things for the sake of the moral compass end up getting ostracized.
Yeah. Well, I mean, time and again in businesses that I know of, there's always the friend of mine was a whistleblower of one of the big investment banks, and they've tried to nail his skin to the wall. And what they rely on is people giving up. After a while, they try hard to fight the system, and they just throw more money than anybody can ever afford, more lawyers, everything at them, until the people go away. Or look at Donald Trump with his, Stormy Daniels, paying people off. And so this is back to that sense of what's right and what's fair. It isn't fair that the rich and the more famous can either have people disappear, or they can, if they're in a company, they can blacken their name. And they just, those people don't know they've been blackballed, or as it were, blackballed, by the way, is when you're in a club and everybody wanted to vote for you to join as a member. You got black balls and white balls, and you'd put the color ball you wanted. And if you got one black ball in the bag, you couldn't join. You were blackballed.
Wow.
And you were out. And I think I've seen this happen with people, that they've called out unethical, unhealthy, dangerous behavior, and no one wants to know them. They're just literally sent to Coventry, as they use the expression. I mean, they won't talk to them again, that they're left on their own, and no one would speak to them. I don't know where that expression is, being sent to Coventry. I do remember once.
I feel sorry for the people of Coventry.
I do.
It's a city in the UK, for the listeners outside.
Which got bombed by the Germans during the war.
Maybe that's why.
And Churchill knew that the bombing was going to go and hit Coventry, but he couldn't, because the Enigma codes had cracked the code that told them that's where they were going to bomb. But he decided he couldn't let it come out, because otherwise the Germans would know that they knew, and that all the other essential information. So he sacrificed Coventry, is whether that's true or not. That's the legend with what
there's
happened.
A lot of Churchill apocryphal tales, aren't there?
I'm listening to him now about his interruption. His meddling in Russia during the Civil War. He hated the communists and wanted the White Russians to win.
I bet.
But the White Russians and Cossacks were so disorganized, so chaotic, and so greedy themselves, that they ate themselves up, because they didn't have one particular leadership team. All these different teams, and eventually they lost, even though the British and the Americans and the Japanese were involved.
Yeah, they're all involved. The great game. Well, Churchill's a great example of leadership. We only really hear the second half, don't we? Like the first half of his leadership resume I don't think reads particularly well historically.
Disastrous.
Yeah.
The Dardanelles.
A lot of meddling. I mean, you talk about South Africa and all that went on down there as well.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean,
we don't talk about it.
Dieppe is where you and I were talking about. I'm doing a 500-kilometer ride to raise money for Help for Heroes and for the Inspiring Leadership Foundation. And as you just told me, that's a long way to go, but it's called the Big Battlefield Bike Ride in June. But Dieppe was one of the ones where Churchill thought it'd be a great idea to send some Marines and a whole invasion force to try and grab it. And it all went badly wrong. Wow. So we got the moral component.
What a start. Yeah.
We got the moral component.
Like
that. The other thing is this idea of, if you do have one of the 8 components, so there's, for those listening, if you haven't heard this first time, Inspiring Leadership, you can see it on my website, jonathanperks.com, but MQ, moral quotient, PQ, meaning and purpose, health and well-being, HQ, CQ, this cultural intelligence, this idea of decision-making you make, and diversity and quality inclusion, EQ, resilience, brand, and then legacy. So these elements. But what happens if one's missing? We've talked about what happens if MQ's missing, but I think the interplay of them is very interesting, Graham. So you and I love our endurance competitions, and I'm trying to get fit. I was out cycling yesterday, just did 26 kilometers on my new bike, and I thought this used to be a really long distance for me. I'm going to be doing 100 kilometers, not just once, but 5 days in a row, and that's going to require a huge amount of endurance.
You'll do it. It's all up here.
Oh yeah, no doubt about it.
Your resilience RQ. It's all there.
I will definitely do it, provided that everything else functions. I've even got my tubeless tires with gel inside them in case I get a puncture.
Got all the kit.
And the cycle.
You'll need a degree for all that nonsense. It's the engine though. The engine, like your engine's good, Jonathan. Might have to swap out a few pieces of the system, but otherwise I think mentally what it takes. Like, you've done a lot of endurance, we've both done endurance races, what is required to get to that level, to do 5 100s. It's not now, okay, I didn't know this thing about training and stuff like that. You've got that drilled into you, so now it's just applying that. You're not going to be as fit as you were when you're 20, but mentally it's there.
Yeah, I think in some ways even more so. We were talking about David Goggins and his 2 books. So Can't Hurt Me, and then the latest one, Never Finished. And I think it's going to feel like this a bit on that cycle ride, never finished. But why is that health component so relevant to people in business? And I think it's this whole concept of the business athlete, which came up in one of the Harvard articles some years ago. That we've got to look after ourselves, our health, well-being, our mental, our physical. I even had, because of yesterday's bike ride in training, I was quite tired today because I hadn't ridden for about 2 or 3 years. And so I had a little power nap just now, which really gave me that extra boost.
But athletes do that. They do. Yeah. You spend a lot of time sleeping.
You certainly do. And I notice it when I don't have the sleep. And I think this is something that leaders are getting now. Many really good leaders get the importance of this. So 7 to 8 hours or even 9 hours of sleep that's not the time in bed, but the actual sleep you get wearing wearable technology like the Oura Ring or whatever it is, that you need it. So like last night, for whatever various reasons, got to sleep at about 1 and got up at 7. And that's not enough sleep. I know it's not enough sleep. And I just found I couldn't think well. And of course, when you can't think well, you then make some bad decisions, which you then have to revisit. Have you ever experienced that?
Oh yeah, I need my sleep. It affects your emotions, doesn't it? Like I think somebody once described it. We talked about emotional intelligence as well in previous, or in EQ, that the part about what sleep does to your emotions, I think it's very tangible. Like every day you start and it's like pouring water into a glass. And you can drink it, you can empty it, and at some point your water overflows, because that's all the sort of nonsense of the crises and the problems, that other people's nonsense that goes into that glass every single day. But if you start that day half full glass, it means that I can only handle so much, and that's what happens. That's what I feel really tangible when my sleep is affected. You know, I'm snapping.
Yeah.
I'm making emotional calls and judgments, which even after doing them straight away, I think actually that was wrong. That wasn't good.
Yeah.
But I can't control it like I could normally if I'm rested.
Yeah. No, it's so true. I mean, little things. I was just doing, like, I've got a bulge in the wall of the tire of the car, and so this is only the tire's only 6 weeks old from another puncture. And I go, is it manufacturing fault? And you talk to them, they go, you probably hit a pothole. And oh no. So you got to do it. So you got to fill a form in and all that kind of, and you just find yourself short. And I know the difference when I've had good amounts of sleep. Nothing really you can take on the world. And this is where the elements of the components of doing something on purpose, PQ, with good resilience, because with good health. But if you don't look after your health, then your resilience fails, or you push things so hard, resilient wise, I'm going to keep going. But actually that then affects your health because you've got no recovery time. I think people are really getting this, and you and I particularly, that time, the eat, move, sleep, breathe, prosper, this whole idea of breathing and calming yourself emotionally and being focused on doing one bit of work. I find, if, like, when I was tired this morning, I was doing a little bit of this and then a little bit of that and then going back to this, and I wasn't thinking well. And I think that affects us all in our work, in business as well, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. The impact of the emotion on decision making is significantly underestimated in both business and life. You know, that is the main driver of our ability to make decisions. I think it might, if we go back to the emotion episode, is that study, just to summarize it, is that there was a famous psychological study which studied people who had damaged the emotional cortex of the brain, and they found that these patients, they could function completely normal, but they couldn't make decisions about everyday life, like, you know, do I drink tea or coffee? And, you know, we often think that people who don't have emotions might be better decision makers. We often think that they're much more logical. And yet the reality is that it's emotion that makes the decision. And logic often is the post-rationalization of it. You know, there has been a movement in recent years to kind of rewrite that a little bit. But, you know, for our generation, generations before, emotion was always seen as a sign of weakness. You know, those days when you would hear on the news of a politician getting stopped driving for being tired and emotional. You know, it's a euphemism for being drunk, isn't it?
Yes,
or women
it was.
being criticized for being too emotional. You know, that's the reality that we're trying hard to leave behind, that sort of narrative, and realize actually how powerful emotions are in making decisions. And there is a sort of a, you know, we have to somehow marry the two. That, you know, how can we talk about emotions in that very positive way? And yet there are negative emotions as well, but yeah, not, you know, suppress them, see them as a bad thing.
Because they lead to poor decisions or good decisions. Now, you know, I think in decision making and thinking, you need to allow your emotions to be there. If you suppress your emotions, you stop thinking. But if you sleep well and you're eating a healthy diet and, you know, you're getting exercise and that kind of stuff, it's good. But I'm seeing a number of leaders who are making poor decisions, and our job is to make decisions. A leader makes decisions.
That is
either they're a decision maker or they're a decision evaluator. And I love the difference between that if you're really good at empowering and delegating to those who work with you without just abrogating, and so that you nothing to do with me, your problem, but you explain it to them, you hand over the responsibility is still yours, but you hand over the accountability to them. That when you're good at that, you can evaluate decisions once a month, once every couple of weeks, but you want decisions being made as low as possible, so people don't go, well, not me. You know, bit like in some of the very large organizations or in some bureaucracies or government departments, they go, well, you know, it's not really my responsibility, so I'm not going to do anything about it. But that's all they do. They make good decisions if they're good leaders. But if they're not properly prepared and they're not looking after themselves, they make bad ones. And the final thought I have, before just interested in your thoughts, is people taking care of themselves, and they can work so hard and so long that they're not looking after the boundaryless. So there's no boundaries with it. So they don't look after their families and their relationships, and they find those crash and burn, or they become such workaholics they don't look after their health, and then they have some big problem with all sorts of things to do with metabolic dysfunction and unhealthiness, and too much weight, and they get diabetes or whatever it might be, or various illnesses, or cancers are triggered by just their lack of looking after themselves, or putting themselves constantly under pressure. Now we want a bit of pressure, hormesis. We want some pressure. Some pressure is good, but constant high levels of pressure is not good for you.
We've done that, Jonathan. Stand guilty, accused. Yeah, we've done it. We've lived through it, and kind of dealing with the consequences of it now. I mean, we've gone through the journey. On the conversation about emotion and decisions and leadership, I want to share a news item that has surfaced, which is a little bit unbelievable, but I would like your opinion on this, because I think you've seen similar in different guises under different technologies. Okay, so the backstory to this is that there is an American digital marketing firm called Clearlink. That's of no consequences, but the CEO, James Clark, so remember that name, he recently went public in quite a high profile interview, which features on Forbes and Fortune. And this is what he was saying about remote work and his team and decision making. So I'd like your thoughts on this. He said, some of our developers could be working for 2 different companies, and that's said in a negative way. We don't know. We hope that's not the case, but we don't know. Many content writers today are now exclusively using AI to write. I can do that in about 30 minutes of an 8-hour workday. So what do we need to do? Let's put out 30 to 50 times our normal production. Now, bear in mind, this is the same guy who sent a memo to his employees who lived within 50 miles of the company's new headquarters in Salt Lake City, that they must start working in the office 4 days a week. And he even praised one employee for getting rid of her, I know this will hurt you as a dog lover, of her pet, such that she could meet the in-office mandate. And he said that most of his people, remote workers, were not working hard at all, and claimed that some had quietly quit but are taking a paycheck. Now, I don't know if this guy knows anything about social media, but news, bad news especially, travels fast. You've met people like this. How would you analyze this leader, and particularly his emotional skills?
Well, of course, it's very interesting. Office Optional is a book that I read early on and got the author, who's just gone out of my head right now, but he was the CEO of a business that for 3 years before the pandemic, they'd never had an office. They got about 1,500 staff in America. Larry English, thank you. Well done. And Larry, very nice guy. And he was sharing, as the pandemic just started, what they were doing. And, 3 times a year, they come together for about 2 or 3 days, they even have a band that meets up, having never met before, apart from, a third of the way through the year. And so Larry was saying that, this is quite possible. It's quite healthy, and quality of life will improve and production will improve. And I think for a number it has. But then there's others that are beginning to realize that there is a cost to it for many organizations, that the new joiners don't get to meet anybody else, that some people, while many of the introverts are very happy to be at home doing their own thing, and would like to have their own cubicle if they were in an office, there is many benefits of people being together. Yep. I was just talking to a client the other day, and generally working from home, but she said she really enjoyed the day when they were all together, a group of about 7 of them, and they just were so productive. And they nailed stuff that would have taken about 3 weeks in a day, But not only that, but there's all the social interaction that comes from swapping ideas and stories, picking up cues from people, the social cues that you don't kind of get, and also the trust building, sharing a personal story about life and what's going on, which in a Zoom call for an hour or 30 minutes, you don't kind of cover unless you can organize it very carefully. So I am a fan of remote work. I mean, in fact, in some ways, I'm doing it. I'm now, rather than being in my office in London. But then again, I was meeting people in face to face pre-pandemic. Now I do. I went to Portugal last week, and I had an incredible time for 3 days with the CEO and the board of a very successful, well-known German brand, and the work was incredible, and we were together, and we achieved so much that within, I think we said within 24 hours, we built an amazing trust from a group to a high-performing team with a high level of trust, personal stories shared, that kind of stuff. And I think there's much to be said for it. You can't. I think you can't do without human interaction. I think staying remote isn't the way ahead.
Yeah, the leaders are struggling with this, aren't they?
Yeah,
because
they really are.
It's not the likely scenario is not either, is it?
No,
it's a mix.
It is a blend, and then of course people go, well, can I decide which, couple of days a week, which ones I'm going to come in on, and then they go, yeah, you decide which one you want, and so no one ever meets anybody else because they come into the office, the office is empty. Exactly. They go, oh, they must come in.
Well, the whole idea of the office is going to change, isn't it? I mean, going back to James Clark, his sort of concept is a little bit archaic. It's top-down control, and yet, maybe some of his gripes are legitimate. About like really what he's saying is he doesn't know what's going on.
Correct.
This is the issue, isn't it?
Yeah, and this is it. It depends on the level you are in the organization. What I found in the feedback from the clients I'm with, if you're the boss and the top team, you like to see what's going on. It's that being aware and being able to touch what you can control. But if you're an employee, generally, you like to work from home on a time schedule that works for you. So you don't have the commute anymore. You can do some walk the dog, take the children to play group or whatever it might be, or to school, walk them back. But then the danger is you end up working the evenings and the weekend. And I've got my neighbor, it works for an American company. And so, 6 o'clock on a Friday night here in the UK, they were just kicking off in America on the West Coast. And they went, well, can you, get that to me in 2 hours time? Well, that would mean she'd have to work from 6 to 8 on a Friday night when they do it. So it does allow us to be more global, but it requires people. So one of the organizations I'm working with, they're in Seattle, they're in New York, they're in London, they're in Poland, they're in the Philippines, and Israel. And so when's going to be the good time?
Yeah.
And sometimes people are getting quite frazzled because they're working, trying to please all the different time zones. And sometimes you have to compromise and say, for this week, we'll do it this way. And for this week, we'll do it that way.
But good people, Jonathan, will figure it out. I think that, like my thoughts are, when it comes to leadership, we probably spend too much time worrying about the detail. This is the hard part, like what are we going to do? Like what days are we going to do, and so on. It's hard, but if, my sort of thoughts about hiring and, times and work hours and things like that, with the right people, it works out. With the wrong people, no matter what you do, it won't work out. So whether you're in the office or at home, with the wrong people, it ain't going to work out.
Correct.
And same with times, like we've given flexi times, or, it just won't work. I mean, maybe in the office with the wrong people, you can police them better, right? You can make sure that they're not burning the place down. And yet with the right people, whatever you do, it will work out. And that means it shifts the focus of leadership to finding the right people, which is a different skill set. It's emotional skills. It's a lot of what we've talked about in leadership is a different set of skills, as opposed to looking at what the content of their resume and CV is, right?
Yeah.
That's tough. Because even like, the whole HR hiring process, the challenge for leaders, it's not there necessarily to pick the best people. It's there to protect the organization and make the less mistakes. So it picks the least bad people, right? As opposed to the best people. Because like picking the best people, sometimes you'd have to take a risk.
That's so very interesting.
And HR won't do that.
No, and as you were speaking, I wrote in 3 words as you spoke: discipline, trust, and attitude. That knowledge, skills, and attitude is often the 3 things that people are looking for. Have they got the knowledge? Do they have the skills to do the job? Have they got the right attitude? But always half attitude was one of the advice I had from a CEO. And I've really seen it come to be true in the problems that my clients, when I'm coaching them, they're getting rid of somebody with a bad attitude. It's not that they're not knowledgeable. They might be making a lot of money for them, but they're toxic, and it infects the rest of the team. And there's not the psychological safety that you need to have a high trust environment. And the other thing is, in the way that you do your work and run meetings, you do need a good discipline to it. So what the team in Portugal loved was I brought quite a strict, they felt it at first before they knew how it's going to work, quite a over-engineered discipline and timekeeping to the meetings, 40-minute meetings. Everybody's going to speak for a minute, and then we have the CEO making the decisions, actions, next step. This is very, very over-structured. But then they went, wow, this is great, because everybody was heard, everybody was involved. You had to be succinct and specific and sincere, and then you got to make a decision. So you didn't have a meeting before the meeting and meeting after the meeting, because they hadn't made a decision in the meeting. And they went, this is really powerful. It's amazing what you can achieve in 40 minutes. So I think discipline, trust, and attitude, if I was to give anybody advice with the way you run your organization, and if you can't trust someone, they got to go. If trust is gone, the person should go. Now, okay, we all make mistakes. I've made more than my fair share. Should I be fired at my first mistake? Hopefully not. But if there's a consistent theme of a lack of trust, then fool on you, because you're letting people get away with it. And no one likes that. Everybody else knows about that person. And you're going, why have you taken so long to get rid of them when we can't trust them and they're not reliable and their attitude sucks?
It's hard. I mean, this is a tough call for leaders, though, isn't it? It's not easy to get rid of people these days.
No.
Based on attitude. They've got to go through the hoops. One of the challenges for leaders and for anybody else in the organization, I suppose everybody's a leader to some degree now. First-time leader or self-leaders, whatever it is. It's not a title, is it? Is trust in these environments. And especially if you're working remote or hybrid, one of the things I tell my team is over-communicate. We don't have the benefit of what you say, Jonathan, like the coffee break where we can sit and have a chat, or, like Friday beers with the team where we can kind of let off a bit of steam. We don't have that because we are remote first as a team. And therefore, what you take for granted working in that environment is not there. I can't just lean over the table and go, Jonathan, do you want to go and grab something, get a sandwich together or something, get coffee, and we'll just have a chat. How's it going? And how's the cycling going? We don't have that. So you have to make the effort to over communicate, and very small things. It's like you have to show. One of the things, we use Slack in the organization, which is like a messaging tool. I say to everybody, it's like when you're at work, whatever hours you work, when you decide you're at work, turn it on and say you're online. And when you're home, even if you're at home, when you're out of work, turn it off. Turn the status away. It then lets us know when you're available and when you're not. If you're there during office hours and you're offline, it's like, what's going on? Where is he? That's no different from the guy at the office who's always like, where's he gone to? He's like sloped off somewhere, right? We have to think about that and over communicate and build trust. And leaders have to do that as well. We have to show what is expected. We have to say, look, this is the reality we are in now. We don't have that luxury. So we have to take the practical steps to communicate with each other and overdo it. Nothing is under communicated.
Yeah, it is a whole interesting area about the amount of social media you have, but can you trust someone? And one of the cases with a leader, and there was a toxic individual in the team, the leader was rather blindsided by them because that person sucked up to them. and that they made a lot of money for the business. So he forgave them for their toxic behavior and the fact they weren't living the values of the organization. And as I began to do the 360 feedback with people, and I talked to them about, their strengths and their areas to develop, and their 360, what feedback they'd had, and how they saw the team, what was working well about the team, and what would make it better. You get a really good view. And I was able to play back to the CEO, talk to all 14 of your team. And this is what I see. And the HR director listened in as well. And she went, "You've nailed it. How did you get this view? You've only been with us, a couple of weeks." I said, people will speak to an independent third party. This is why 360s, verbal 360s are so useful. And they'll say much more than they will to the boss. And so when the boss then went, so this particular person is a problem. Yeah. So he then goes and talks to a number of the others about this person. What should we do? Oh, no, they're fine. So they backtrack because they're talking to the CEO. Of course, they won't say what they really think, which is a bit of a problem for the CEO. Why wouldn't they tell him what they really think? But they'll tell me. So I think 360 is incredibly useful by an independent party to get the view of who is really pulling their weight. And who do the others feel? Why is the leader letting this person, like Dominic Raab, bully other people and get away with it? But we all know it. And they see the leader as weak if the leader doesn't deal with the issue and just sits on it and forgives that person time and again. But they wouldn't forgive anybody else. But they're blindsided to that particular person, and they forgive them their many inconsistencies and their lack of integrity and their bad behavior and their toxicity and the way they treat other people. Not acceptable.
This is the problem for leadership, isn't it? Blindside, blind spots. That's why you need your mental sounding board, better reference points.
I think so. But I'm interested. You've done some rather good posts recently. I do enjoy reading what you put out. It's always succinct to the point, but thought-provoking on AI, artificial intelligence. It's become quite a topic for you. And what is the world going to be like as we've already started? I mean, I use ChatGPT quite a bit.
Let me get my crystal ball out.
Yeah.
Dig it out, blow the dust off.
Who's going to look after the MQ aspects of AI?
Wow.
Who's deciding? Will it decide itself what is morally correct? Isn't there that experiment where you've got the railway track divides and you have a lever that you can pull and the train's due to go down the track and it will drive over someone who's tied across the tracks and kill them? Or you could pull the lever and it will, I think it's going down the track and it's going to kill about 5 people. Or you can pull the lever and it'll go down the track.
Crash into
it'll kill
school
one
bus,
person.
isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, but how do you decide which is the right one to do?
Right. Would even human beings be able to do that though? That's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you look at a good example, it's like with driverless cars. Like people say the risk factor of having driverless cars, but in terms of mileage done, they're far less risky than human beings. Like driverless cars don't drink alcohol and drive, right? They don't take drugs and drive, and they don't, get into road rage at the lights. Yeah. So, all of that is not factored in. So, these sort of thought experiments about, what about AI if it does this or this? Now we need to take them into account, but we can't forget the fallibility of the human being as well. That as well. And to the point about AI, I'm glad you brought this up because I did actually graduate with an AI degree many, many years ago in 1995. 1995.
I'm impressed, sir. You were ahead of the crowd.
Well, 2 ahead. I've waited 28 years for this, Jonathan, this coming of age. Waited my time for AI the interesting thing, so why I feel at that time I'm not regretful of studying AI is because of the computational power of AI in 1995, and bear in mind that was before Netscape Navigator and AOL Online and all that. Windows 95 was cutting edge. Because it was in that era, much of the talk of AI was philosophical. It was about intelligence, it was about morals. It was about epistemology, the study of knowledge and stuff like that. So that study is not taught today because it's all very application based, machine learning and algorithms. So the people doing it haven't really thought about the philosophy of AI because they didn't need to. They weren't sort of sitting around twiddling, waiting for the computers to catch up. But that's kind of where I came from. There has been some really interesting developments recently. Obviously, ChatGPT is a game changer. There is a report which your listeners might be interested in checking out by Mercer, obviously the pharmaceutical life company, aimed at chief people officers. So this would be relevant to CEOs as much as anybody else, because they are the chief people officer in many ways. It's called the Chief People Officer's Quick Guide to Generative Artificial Intelligence. Now, generative AI is like ChatGPT or some of the artistic ones that can create images, these sort of fake images of Boris Johnson getting arrested. So have you that one done the rounds on social media?
I haven't seen that one yet.
It's been carried away by these three coppers, and it looks so real, Jonathan. It's amazing. And basically somebody's just typed in, like, create a picture, a photo of Boris Johnson getting nicked by three policemen.
Wow.
It's phenomenal.
I've seen the Pope with his white ski jacket.
Yeah,
it's so good.
We're just at the beginning. It's really interesting, this report. Some of I'm not going to give away all the findings. Your listeners can go and find it on the Mercer website. But they're talking about the medium-term considerations, and the interesting ones. This is all about leadership, effectively. Top one is optimizing talent. So it's like, building your people. How do you nurture the right people? We've just talked about that. The second one is organizational culture. That is leadership, isn't it? About how do you set the tone? That's what we talked about. And then it's about the culture of innovation, like you talked about, getting people together and creating those ideas. And that's all changing. But what I found interesting is the opening lines of this report, which is like no messing around. It said, in just a few weeks, ChatGPT has transformed the way we work, learn, and create. That's like not messing around as a statement. And that is just a few weeks. Like, if we did this podcast, and I hope we do in a couple of years, looking back, wow, it's going to be phenomenal what the impact on leadership is going to be.
What do you tend to use ChatGPT for? I've got the version 5 and I subscribe to it. What do you tend to use it for?
A lot in our business. It goes back to the way we use AI in our business. Like people, because we do podcasts, people say, "Oh, you're going to use podcasts to create AI voices," and there'll be Graham and Jonathan talking in AI. It would just be made up, and that's possible, but it won't be real, right? I'm very much inspired by the Churchill anecdote, apocryphal tale, when he was asked to defund the arts, to fund, the war effort. I don't know how true it is, but it's kind of like through the writings. And when he was asked to do that, he turned around and said, then what are we fighting for? And the moral story in that, I feel, is that, what is the point of automation? It's not necessarily automation for automation's sake, but it's automation to elevate the human condition. Like, if we can take away work, then we can achieve that peak flow state. That's what gets in our way. Work, tasks, stuff, to-do lists. So we use it a lot for that. A lot of automation in the background. You won't see it. You won't be amazed by what it does, but actually what it does is it's like electricity. And the scientist Michio Kaku, the astrophysicist, said that AI is the new electricity. So imagine what electricity did to human society. It transformed it, not just society, but the way we worked, education, everything, gender roles. It changed everything. So AI will have that impact without us really knowing it. We're going to think it's going to be robots and, like RoboCops and all that kind of stuff. But what's happening is all the stuff underneath that we're not really seeing, that is going to impact us. And that's what leaders have to know, because, it's easy to talk about, it's going to, we're going to have AI robots policing the streets and doing all these kind of things. That's not a realistic scenario in the next few years. The reality is it's just going to be a lot of stuff under the hood.
But it's fascinating. It's a fascinating area, and I'm really pleased that you've sort of come into your own in this whole topic of AI. And I think it is fascinating, particularly when you think about the wasteful time that we spend trying to look stuff up or whatever it might be. I found it very helpful to get sort of quick answers to any questions, really, pretty much, that I ask, apart from things that are trying to talk about something that's happened today or tomorrow, because its research went up to about, was it September 2021? But then it does actually give you answers about things in the last 2 or 3 years as well, even though it says it's not got the data, because it does it. I find it great on things like book reviews and stuff like that, and the top tips from a whole book. I was hoping to be able to write my book from a collection of the words of my podcast, and I think eventually I will, but it can't do it at the moment. And its accuracy, it's getting better and better. It knew all about my father and him being killed in the air crash. It got the aircraft wrong, but apart from that, pretty much else.
Those are called hallucinations. Correct. That's what it's called. The technical term. It hallucinates a lot. And we're not talking ayahuasca, Jonathan. We're talking like it makes stuff up because it doesn't know what's real and what's not.
Yeah.
I would say the interesting thing, where we're going next with this, Jonathan, for your listeners as well, for leaders who are kind of trying to understand and get their head around it, ChatGPT is like, we can see it tangible, like Jonathan uses it, like lots of people are using it that aren't, data scientists. The next step is what's called Auto GPT. That is going to change a lot of things. Now, Auto GPT, for those that don't know, is like, it's like a next level of GPT, ChatGPT. What it does is it takes the same underlying technology of ChatGPT from OpenAI, the company, and it creates automated bots. So what you can do with ChatGPT, you can type in and say, give me like 10 suggestions for planning a wedding, right? And it will give you, what you can do. What Auto GPT can do is actually plan the wedding. It can take that, and it's connected to APIs, interfaces, the internet, email addresses, and start doing it for you. Now, that is something that leaders have to know, because there are a lot of jobs out there that are really just filling boxes. They might be a lawyer, a very well-paid box filler. But think about it, that is going to fundamentally change work. Auto GPT is the beginning. Like ChatGPT is just kind of like the plaything for us, right?
Wow, I think that's really interesting, because doctors in the surgery, a GP chatting to you, most of the time they're on the keyboard, filling in things and not looking at you. And the hope is that they'll actually be able to, as they're talking to you, it'll be recorded it'll come up on the screen what you're discussing, and then it will come up with some solutions of the right kind of pills and requirement, and what prognosis might be from your symptoms of what your illness is caused by, and therefore what's required, all the options. And I think that's going to be an improvement. And as you say, accountants and lawyers, where you're expected to be an expert on family law, let's say, going back to the torrid time I went through with the divorce, but it will know the latest law on everything across the whole of the country. It will know everything, where some of them, they don't know the stuff, or they spend hours trying to charge you for their time. You're being charged for 10 minutes, whereas this thing can do it in 10 seconds.
Yeah, and it's more accurate, I bet.
Yeah.
It probably can't make the emotional judgments, the empathic decisions.
No.
Which are going to be different, right?
But then again, if I honestly tell you, many of the lawyers couldn't make empathic decisions.
A few doctors as well, I bet.
No. I mean, this is the case, that many of them are high IQ but low EQ. But Auto GPT will have much greater IQ.
Change everything.
Much greater IQ than many of these people who think they're smart. And in that world, it's like, I think you've touched on it, like, what about love, and what about life, and what about relationships, and will we have more time for to elevate the human condition, and how will this affect our work? But I do think, and bringing this back just in the last few minutes to inspiring leadership, what will we want our leaders to do? Do we want them to be? I remember one leader in one of the big banks. He would do deep dives in the bank, and everybody would scatter to get as much information as they can for him. So if he asked them real detailed information about about their bit of the business. They knew all the answers. Well, what a waste for about 3 weeks beforehand. Well, if he wants the answer, the person would just go, okay, here's the answer. ChatGPT, you don't need me.
You can actually do that. There's a feature on ChatGPT, or there's apps that are being developed which actually connect to all your documents.
Oh, really?
And you can talk to your documents. It's crazy as a concept. So effectively, that is already happening. So for example, let's say you've got 10,000 PDFs of contracts, or in the financial services, or the key illustrations that they have for clients. You could just talk to them, and it will tell you what's going on.
Wow,
that's phenomenal. You think of that, that's somebody's job.
Yeah, and also it makes you think about access to that data, because of course it's not secure at the moment. And do you give it access to all your documents and the confidential information on your clients?
Yeah, it's already happening, isn't it? Was it Samsung? All Samsung's developers were caught using Chat. Because one thing actually, and I've used it for, ChatGPT is really good at writing code. And that's something that's interesting because, it's actually much, much better at writing code than I ever can, right? And it can just get it straight away. Even at the most basic level, if you use Excel or Google Sheets, you've got those formulas and they're a little bit difficult sometimes. You can actually ask ChatGPT and it will give you it. And 9 times out of 10, it nails it. Yeah. And so what was happening, Samsung, obviously the mobile phone company, the developers were actually going to ChatGPT and putting in their code and saying, like, can you write this for me, this app? But what they didn't realize is actually ChatGPT uses that as its learning set. So that then becomes public information.
Yes. And I think a lot of my son-in-law is a developer, and he's a clever guy, and feels secure for the future. But I don't think he is secure if ChatGPT can write the code better than he can.
Yeah.
And a fraction of the cost.
Yeah. Well, so certainly for the next generation, it's questionable, isn't it? For kids to, getting into the workplace now, if you've got kids who are graduating, they need to think about, like the doctors, they need to think about what are the skills that we will need, because there'll be a bit that AI can't do, which is like double down on that, the human part. You talked about what about love and what about, I know, you think, what does that mean to business? But that's it, isn't it? It's not necessarily love, but it's the skills, isn't it? It's the vulnerability, the empathy that ChatGPT or any AI doesn't have, because it hasn't felt it, it hasn't lived, it hasn't lost. Hasn't lost somebody, understand the suffering of a human being. If you see an employee suffering, like ChatGPT is going to think differently to a human being, because the human being understands, look, there are rules, but I understand that in this case I'm going to make an exception. And ChatGPT can't do that. Yeah. And that's where we need to double down. Imagine a doctor doing that. Can you imagine a developer doing that? They're going to have to think differently. What is that sort of elevated state, that peak state of human existence that we need to become as leaders?
Well, Graham, this is a fascinating topic, and I think it's a nice way to end this particular series for now. And we're going to look for other occasions where you and I can collaborate and have some guests on and chat with them. But I just want to appreciate you in the end of this one on Inspiring Leadership, that you are, for me, what I appreciate is the breadth and the depth of your interest and knowledge in a whole range of topics, whether it be about AI or endurance training or leadership or just global issues. I really value and appreciate that in you. You're a good friend.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, it certainly has been a journey, hasn't it? And hopefully chapter 1, it's not the last chapter. When you invited me to do this with you, I was, curious at first. I mean, we hit off from the first time we did the podcast together, and then we thought we'd do this together. And this is going to be really interesting, but it's grown. Like, I've learned about you, and your adventures have inspired me, maybe inspired me to kind of raise my game a little bit. Especially on the endurance side now that the gauntlet is laid down. But I appreciate all of that. I've had a great time, and I've really enjoyed your company, and enjoyed sort of it's refreshing, your whole sort of mindset and attitude towards learning and challenging yourself. It's not sort of challenging in like, I'm just going to break through and I'm going to do 100K and then 200K and then 300K. We know those people, right? It's more about I'm going to make myself more and more out there and vulnerable. Like I'm sort of almost living vicariously a little bit through you, seeing you just ahead of me, like doing all these things. Like, you went out to the jungle in Peru. Was it Peru? And then you like did the Hoffman method. I mean, that's quite life-changing for you, but there's been so many things in between as well, Jonathan. It's like, I feel like I'm just observing, but I appreciate all of that because I've really been inspired by it. I mean, hence the name of the podcast, but it's not like you're just interviewing inspiring people. You are it. You are doing it. You're living it. You're actually out there and doing it. And that's just been, what a ride. I really enjoyed it. And I hope there's more.
Yeah, there's going to be one hell of a ride. And when I cross that line, when my life ends, there'll be a squeal of tires and burning rubber, and I'll go, "Hell, what a ride! What a ride!"
Don't want to hear. Don't put it in the same context like tires and ending your life, because you've got a few rides to do yet.
We have. Yeah,
don't jinx it.
No. Live life as you mean to live it, and I'm going to make the most of every day because I'm very blessed.
You're doing it.
Time with you is special. So thank you. Thank you to our listeners for entertaining our exchange of ideas, and hopefully some useful tips that people can take away to think about their own lives and how you can be, everyone listening, how you can be more inspiring leaders to make a difference in the world, one day at a time, one person at a time. So thank you, Graham.
Yeah, thank you so much.